Hello, you are watching Pretty Guardian Gaming, and today we are going to be talking about Atelier Yumia, the Alchemist of Memories in the Envisioned Land. This game is part of the long-running Atelier series made by Gust and Koei Tecmo games. It came out on March 21st of 2025 and is available on Xbox, PlayStation, Nintendo Switch, and PC, which is where I played it. I would definitely consider it a role-playing game. It has a focus on character development and narrative. A lot of people would call it an action game, and while I can definitely understand that, the combat just didn't feel that way for me. Let's talk about why. You can see enemies on the overland zone, and by hitting them or interacting with them, you can trigger combat. You're then brought into combat mode, where you and two of your allies fight against the monsters you encounter. On the left-hand side of the screen, you can see your 4 attack abilities and little boxes indicating the number of times that you can use that ability before it goes into a cooldown timer. On the bottom left is Yumia's health bar, and then over on the right, you can see the health of your companions. You are able to move around during the fights, and movement is encouraged in several ways. For example, when the orange attack markers appear on the ground, you'll want to either block or dodge those. Combat feels very similar to Atelier Ryza, except it does lean more towards action combat rather than almost rhythm combat that Ryza had. For example, they got rid of the call and response where your party members would shout out the kind of attack to do, and then it would trigger a powerful joint attack if you did it. In Atelier Yumia, your party members will still do joint attacks with you that are called friend actions and are based on first breaking down an enemy's defense and then using your attack items on them. They also added an inner and outer range to combat. You can move to the outer range to use your ranged gun weapon and dodge melee attacks. This does make combat feel more dynamic, and that's why I can understand some people considering it to be action. For me, it still feels like an active time battle. The fights are instanced, your positioning matters, but you're relegated to inner and outer zones rather than having meaningful free movement. Half of your moveset is through your items, which ultimately feels more menu-based than something like Avowed or even Visions of Mana. Overall, I enjoyed the combat, and they could definitely refine it into something amazing in future games. My biggest critique is not the combat itself, but of a couple things related to it. For starters, you level up very quickly in this game. I reached the max level of 100 by the time I was about halfway through the story. I know of people who got to level 100 before even that point, just by grinding for materials for crafting. I think they should have made the power scaling at the higher levels slightly higher, making your characters a little stronger than they presently are at level 100. Then they should have made gaining those levels about 20% harder to gain. This would have given the players the opportunity to continue growing their characters further into the late game and made those level gains feel more impactful. There is a craftable item called training weights that boost your XP gain, and so even with this change, the leveling would have been reasonably quick for the more casual players. To that end, they should also make the endgame mobs stronger. As it stands, most of the fights are trivialized. I barely had to engage with the actual mechanics of the combat system to win fights, to the point where they explained something about mana ultimate attacks that I basically never got to use because the fights don't last long enough and the enemies aren't strong enough for it to matter. The combat balance in this game is some of the most broken that I have ever seen in an Atelier game. My second critique is that there should have been more boss monster variety. We see a lot of the classic Atelier monsters that we've come to expect from previous games, such as Poonies and Roadrunners, and we see some variations of the monsters in size and color scheme, but we have very few unique boss fights. And now that we've talked about the combat, I want to circle back to the story and explain some of the other gameplay elements in Atelier Yumia. The general vibe of Yumia takes itself more seriously than most of the previous games in the Atelier series. Thematically, we are exploring the negative sides of alchemy and people having the ability to manufacture the fantastic and horrible. The basic premise of Atelier Yumia is that we are in a world where alchemy has been banned because of a history of human rights violations and its role in the downfall of the Aladician Empire. Our protagonist is Yumia Leisfeld, an alchemist who is trained in secret by her mother and joins up with an exploration crew who's going back to Aladice to explore the ancient ruins and figure out exactly what happened with alchemy and the former empire. She reminds me a little bit of the Atelier version of Squall Leonhardt, first in some basic design elements like their foppish chin-length brownish black hair, dark clothing with white contrast and accents of red, down to their weapons, where Squall had the gunblade and Yumia has a gun staff. Even their personalities have some parallels in that Yumia is much more contemplative and introspective than the typical Atelier heroine. Overall, I thought the story was great, and there were several key moments that really left me on the edge of my seat wanting to see what would happen next. I loved how they connected the stories of the side characters into the main narrative. This cast of characters matters to the story being told in a way that wasn't present in previous Atelier games, and I appreciated that. I'll be interested to see if Yumia's weapon, the gun staff, becomes as iconic as Squall's gunblade was. One thing that this game did really well with it is that it wasn't just a gimmick, it actually directly ties into the gameplay. For example, before combat, you can shoot an enemy to break down their defense and begin the fight at an advantage. However, the main difference between Atelier Yumia and other games in the series is that it takes place all on one large open world. The game is about exploring these maps. You and your exploration crew will head into dangerous, mana-bound areas where you'll fight monsters, gather materials, and eventually correct the flow of mana in that area. You'll find dozens of landmarks and other points of interest where you can solve puzzles like reconnecting a mana relay, shooting prisms to gain skill points, or taking on side quests that pop up. Side quests are just straightforward tasks like crafting an item, delivering a material that you can gather, or fighting a monster along the road in a trial of strength. During this time, you're also following mana trails to gather particles. Once you have your particles, skill points, and materials, you can head back to the Atelier to do some crafting. To spend your skill points, you just jump into the menu and go to your skill tree. There's a tree for synthesis that improves your ability to craft new items. You also have trees for combat and exploration. Over at the side table, you can spend particles to unlock new recipes and to level up your current recipes. Then you have the shrine here where you do the bulk of your crafting. This game gives you a lot of flexibility in how you want to customize the items you craft. For the sake of keeping it easy on myself, I primarily use the auto crafting feature. If I was making an item for a quest, I tended to use the low quality options because it would get rid of some of my excess materials. And the people who I was turning the items over to, they don't care about quality. Depending on the purpose of the item, I would often choose between enhancing the quality or focusing on the effect that the item produces. The equipment and items that you craft are going to make the biggest difference in how your character performs in combat. There are lots of interconnecting systems that I barely touched on either, like building structures and decorating them. You would think that the scope of this game was a mile wide and an inch deep. Right now on Steam, it has mixed reviews, with user Nerjaveka having this to say. First Atelier game I'm rating ever. I've played since Rorona. Now they turn it into mobile slop. Alchemy is boring, dumbed down, and god-awful. Exploration is huge map with repeatable dumb activities over and over, and doubling down on endless useless chests. There were warning bells in the latest entries in the series. Sad to see it got even worse. The story was never the strong part of an Atelier game, but earlier titles had more humor at least and didn't take itself very seriously, which is okay for casual game. Now it's just too boring and generic. You just know they're out of ideas when they give you this ending. And now there's even bugs. I had two serious ones, one preventing me to finish a quest and the other getting an ingredient. Atelier games were always bug-free before. It's annoying to high heavens. I really struggled to find positives. Some environments are pretty, but the magic is lost when you stretch it endlessly with empty content. I was wondering why the mixed rating on Steam. Now I'm surprised it's not worse. During the first half of the game, I was excited by how many puzzles there were, But in the second half, I realized it wasn't that there were a lot of puzzles, these were just the same puzzles repeated over and over again. I still enjoyed it. Turning the question marks on the map into points of interest was very enjoyable to me, even if the content wasn't outstanding. Adding new puzzles and more variety is something they could easily build upon in a subsequent game or even in DLC. It seems like the thing that's most divisive about this game can be found in the heart of this user's review. The story was never the strong part of an Atelier game. Most people who play these games want humor, they want slice of life, they want deep and satisfying crafting. This game is not going to give you that. It'll give you an in-depth story, interesting characters, and lots to explore. I've heard other people describe it as a great JRPG and a bad Atelier game. I can see how that would be true to some people. I just don't think that that's a fair framing to put the game in. A game can't keep doing the same things over and over again. Just looking at the inner workings of a studio, you have developers and teams of people who work on a game for years before it releases. People get tired of doing the same projects and they want to try different things. This is true even if they decide to stay within the same genre. It's one of the main reasons companies like Larian decided not to just make Baldur's Gate 4 as their next project. Those types of inner workings aside, the market changes over time too. When Atelier first started, it was a relatively niche thing, but between the mainstream success of Atelier Ryza, which was 6 years ago, mind you, and the mainstreamification of anime and JRPGs in general, the toothpaste can't go back in the tube. 20 years ago, there was only a handful of JRPGs that would make it to the US in a year, and I could play every single one of them and more. Nowadays, there are too many titles. Persona, Like a Dragon, Star Ocean, Legend of Heroes, Tales of, Dragon Quest, Ys, and so many more. The market has changed and moved on in ways that Gust has to stay on top of if they expect their business to even tread water. And I, for one, appreciate the direction and the risk that they took with this game. When I played Avowed, one of my biggest criticisms of the game is that the gameplay loop was too narrow. It felt like they needed some kind of additional activity, like a mini game or related side system, to make the gameplay feel more varied and whole. Atelier Yumia succeeded in that, and I will absolutely keep coming back for fantastic RPGs with a focus on story, exploration, and crafting. Thank you so much for watching along today. If you enjoy videos about RPGs and video games and other nerdy topics, you should definitely throw me a subscribe because I will be bringing you more. And until then, I hope you are living your best life, and I will catch you in the next video.